He thought she was just another black woman he could intimidate, until she walked into court and dismantled his career. The road was nearly empty that night. A few cars rolled past, their headlights flashing across wet pavement.
Streetlights flickered, stretching long shadows over the quiet stretch of highway outside Birmingham, Alabama.
It was just past 11, the hour when most people wanted nothing more than to be home. Lieutenant Commander Renee Dawson had been driving for nearly 2 hours, her fingers drumming lightly on the steering wheel as she hummed along to an old jazz tune playing low through the speakers. She wasn't in uniform, just a black sweater, jeans, and her hair pulled back.
She looked ordinary. Unremarkable. Or so she thought. Then came the lights.
Red and blue flashed in her rearview mirror, gaining fast. Her stomach tightened, not from fear but fatigue.
She'd seen this before, too many times.
She signaled, changed lanes, and eased her car onto the shoulder. The tires crackled against gravel. She put the car in park, took a long, steady breath, and kept both hands visible on the wheel. A white patrol car idled behind her. The officer took his time getting out. When he finally did, he moved like a man used to being obeyed, heavy boots scraping asphalt, one hand resting near his weapon, the other gripping a flashlight. Its beam sliced through the dark, sweeping across her rear window before landing on her face. She turned her head slightly, catching his reflection in the side mirror. His badge glinted under the light.
Briggs.
License and registration.
No greeting. No explanation.
His voice was clipped, mechanical, too practiced. Renee met his eyes in the mirror before moving deliberately, slow enough to make every motion clear. She reached for the glove compartment, retrieved her documents, and held them out. "Was I speeding, officer?" Her tone was polite, steady. Briggs didn't answer. He snatched the papers and gave her car a long, dismissive once-over.
"Tail lights out." She frowned.
"That can't be right." He finally looked at her, a faint curl of irritation touching his mouth.
"Are you arguing with ME?"
The silence that followed was heavy, taut. Renee could feel the shift, the invisible current of authority and defiance colliding. She'd been trained to read that moment, to measure her words, her tone, her breath.
"The Navy taugt her Disziplin, Restraint, Survival."
"I'm just saying," she said evenly, "my tail lights were checked a few weeks ago. But if there's an issue, I'll have it fixed." "Step out of the car."
The interruption came sharp, final. Renee exhaled slowly.
She glanced toward the passing cars, too few, too far away. No witnesses. Her fingers tapped the steering wheel once, a small rhythm of focus. She looked back at him.
"Mein telling MEVHY."
Briggs tilted his head, smirking like a man confident he didn't have to explain. "Because I said so." The words hung in the air, thick with arrogance. Renee unbuckled her seatbelt, pushed the door open, and stepped out. The night air was cooler than she expected, brushing against her skin like a warning. She stood tall, calm, unflinching. Briggs took a step back, scanning her from head to toe, reassessing. She could feel it, the calculation behind his eyes, the flicker of recognition that maybe, just maybe, he had picked the wrong woman tonight.
"Turn around."
Hands on the car.
This time, Renee hesitated. "For what reason?" she asked.
Briggs took a step closer.
The smirk vanished.
"Are you resisting?" Renee stood her ground.
"No."
"I'm asking a question." Something flickered across his face, annoyance, maybe amusement. Then, without warning, he grabbed his radio. "We've got a non-compliant driver here," he muttered into the mic. Then louder, "Turn around." Her pulse picked up, but her expression stayed calm. "Officer, I need you to understand something," she said, voice low and steady. "I know exactly what I'm allowed to do, and exactly what you can't do." Briggs didn't like that.
His jaw tightened.
"You're under arrest," he snapped, reaching for her wrist. Renee moved first, just a small step back, enough to avoid his hand.
"Under arrest for what?"
"Obstructing an officer," he shot back, pulling out his cuffs. She exhaled sharply through her nose. So that was his game. Her military training took over.
Heart rate even.
Breathing measured. Every decision precise. She had two options: comply and fight later, or resist and risk everything. She wasn't going to become another statistic on a roadside shoulder. With slow, deliberate movements, she turned and placed her hands on the roof of her car. The metal felt cold against her palms.
Briggs wasted no time.
He yanked her arms behind her back and snapped the cuffs on too tight. Pain bit through her wrists. Then he shoved her toward his patrol car. "You don't know what you're doing," she murmured,
Briggs chuckled.
Lady, I know exactly what I'm doing.
But he didn't. Not even close.
The hard plastic seat dug into her back as she sat in the rear of the cruiser. The cuffs burned against her skin. She drew a slow breath and kept her gaze forward. The door slammed shut, sealing her inside. Outside, Briggs strutted back to his car, muttering into his radio. She caught his reflection in the partition glass, a swaggering silhouette, confident and careless. Her own reflection looked back at her, faint and still.
Calm. Controlled.
But underneath, something simmered. She'd been through combat drills, night operations, interrogations overseas. She'd faced men with guns and orders. But this was different. This was a man with a badge and a grudge, drunk on his own authority.
Minutes passed. Then 5. Then 10.
She shifted slightly, testing the cuffs.
Too tight.
Deliberately so. The driver's door opened. Briggs slid in, whistling under his breath. Well, well, he said, buckling his seatbelt.
Let's take a little ride. René Said noting.
He threw the car into gear, pulling off the shoulder. The patrol lights still flashed, red and blue bleeding across the wet road behind them. You know, Briggs said after a moment, his tone casual but sharp at the edges, most people just keep their mouths shut when I tell them to step out. Renee exhaled through her nose. And most officers don't arrest people for questioning a traffic stop. Briggs laughed, shaking his head. Lady, you must really think you're somebody. She looked at him through the partition glass, her voice even.
I don't think. I know.
For a second, his knuckles tightened around the wheel. The smugness cracked, just briefly, before he covered it with another grin. You military? Briggs asked, his tone shifting, probing. Renee didn't answer. Yeah, I figured, he went on. You've got that attitude, above the law type. He smirked, eyes glinting in the dim patrol car light. Bet you thought I'd back off if you threw that around, huh?
She stayed silent. Briggs clicked his tongue.
Shame, he muttered, shaking his head. If you'd just kept your mouth shut, we could have avoided all this.
Her jaw tightened.
The audacity of it, how easily he twisted blame, as though she had forced his hand. Up ahead, the station came into view, a squat gray brick building crouched just off the main road, its windows glowing faintly yellow. The parking lot was nearly empty. Late-night processing was slow, and tonight it looked like she'd be the only guest. Briggs pulled into a reserved spot near the entrance, killed the engine, and turned toward her through the partition. Gotta say, he murmured, eyes crawling over her reflection in the glass, I do love when they make it easy. Before she could respond, he was out of the car, slamming the door hard enough to make the frame shudder.
A moment later, her door swung open. Let's go, he ordered.
Renee stepped out, twisting her wrists slightly. The cuffs dug into her skin, metal biting deep. He hadn't loosened them at all. She kept her head high as he led her inside. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, washing everything in a sterile glow. A bored-looking desk sergeant barely lifted his head as they passed, mumbling something into a logbook. Processing smelled of old coffee, sweat, and disinfectant. A metal bench ran along the far wall, a steel door leading to the holding cells just beyond it. Briggs uncuffed her only long enough to push her through booking. Fingerprints, mugshot, the whole routine. The officers behind the desk didn't even look up, their indifference a quiet kind of violence all its own. She'd seen that before, the kind of apathy that let bad men like Briggs operate unchecked. When it was done, he grabbed her wrist again, fingers digging into flesh.
You think you're smart, huh? He muttered.
She glanced sideways. I don't have to think.
His grip tightened. He didn't like that.
Enjoy your stay, Briggs sneered, shoving her toward the cell. Renee caught herself before she stumbled. She turned as the bars slid shut between them, the clang echoing through the small block. Briggs stood on the other side, smirking. He tapped the bars twice with his fingers, almost playful, before walking away. The lock clicked into place, final and cold. She took a long breath and sat down. The metal bench was hard, unforgiving. The chill of it seeped through her jeans, grounding her. One night, she told herself. That was all it would take. Because Briggs had no idea who he'd just messed with. The cell was small, 4 concrete walls, a flickering light overhead, and the faint stench of sweat and bleach. She'd spent nights in worse places, in countries where danger was real and sleep came only in fragments. This wasn't fear, it was fury. From down the hall came the low murmur of officers talking, the rustle of papers, the clatter of a coffee cup against a desk.
She closed her eyes. Control the breathing. Control the mind.
It was muscle memory now, discipline drilled into her long before she'd earned her rank.
Then came footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. Briggs.
She knew his stride, the arrogant rhythm of a man who believed he owned every room he walked into. He appeared in front of the cell, arms crossed, smirk still firmly in place.
Comfy? He asked.
Renee didn't answer. He tilted his head, stepping closer to the bars. You know, Briggs said, voice low and smug, if you just played along, you wouldn't be in here right now. Renee let a slow smile curl at the edges of her lips. Oh, I'm exactly where I need to be.
For a moment, his smirk faltered.
A flicker of something, annoyance, maybe uncertainty, crossed his eyes before he masked it with a scoff. He glanced toward the empty holding area. No one's coming to get you tonight, lady, he said, shrugging. Guess that means you'll have some time to think about that attitude.
Renee Said noting. She just watched him, unmoved, unshaken.
Briggs leaned closer to the bars. See, here's the thing, he continued, his tone dropping to a mock whisper. People like you think the rules don't apply. You think a little confidence is enough to get you out of trouble.
She let him talk.
Let him fill the silence with his own arrogance.
It didn't matter.
Because he had no idea what was coming. Right on cue, footsteps echoed down the hall. Another officer appeared, a younger man, maybe late 20s, clipboard in hand.
He stopped a few feet away, uncertain. Sergeant, he began. We got a call.
Briggs barely looked at him. The younger officer shifted on his feet. I think you need to see this. Briggs frowned, irritation flashing across his face. After a beat, he gave Renee one last look, something between confusion and suspicion, then stalked off toward the hallway.
Renee leaned back against the cold wall, listening.
Their voices carried faintly from down the corridor. She couldn't make out every word, but she caught enough. Lawyer higher up, why she's being held. Then Briggs's voice, sharper now, defensive. The younger officer stammered a response. Whatever he said, it didn't make Briggs happy.
Moments later, heavy footsteps returned.
Briggs stormed back into view, jaw tight, fists clenched.
The swagger was gone. What the hell did you do? He demanded.
Renee leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. I didn't do anything. She tilted her head, her voice calm, measured.
But people talk.
And some of us, she added, have friends in very high places.
High-S face-darkened.
She could see it, the realization creeping in, the slow unraveling of control. The shift in power was unmistakable. Without another word, he turned on his heel and stalked away, muttering curses under his breath.
Renee exhaled, slow and steady. It wouldn't be long now.
When the truth came out, Briggs would regret every decision that led him here. Morning light spilled through the narrow windows of the courthouse, casting long streaks across the polished marble floors. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that settled deep into your bones if you stayed still too long. Renee stood at the defendant's table, posture relaxed, eyes sharp.
No handcuffs. No orange jumpsuit. Just a teiloret navy blue blazer, a white blouse, and quit authority.
Beside her, her attorney Carla Whitman flipped through a stack of papers.
Efficient. Composed. Focused.
Renee liked that about her. No wasted words, no wasted movement. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open.
Briggs walked in.
He still tried to carry himself like he owned the room, shoulders squared, chin lifted, but something in his stride had changed.
A stiffness.
A flicker of doubt behind his practiced confidence. Renee caught his eye.
He looked away first. Good.
The judge entered, and the room fell silent. Judge Alan Kirkland, an older man with a weary expression, adjusted his glasses as he settled behind the bench. He glanced over the files, sighing.
All right, he said. Let's get to it.
The prosecutor, a middle-aged man with neatly combed hair, rose from his seat. Your Honor, we have reason to believe that the defendant, Lieutenant Commander Renee Dawson, was unlawfully detained without probable cause. Furthermore, new information suggests a pattern of misconduct involving the arresting officer, Sergeant Daniel Briggs.
A low murmur rippled through the courtroom.
Briggs shifted in his seat, jaw tightening. Judge Kirkland peered at him over his glasses. Sergeant Briggs, care to explain? Briggs leaned forward, clearing his throat. Your Honor, the defendant was uncooperative during a routine traffic stop.
The prosecutor cut him off. Unkooperative.
He lifted a document from his table. Lieutenant Commander Dawson's record shows a distinguished military career. Naval Academy graduate, multiple commendations, no criminal history, no outstanding citations. Are you suggesting that despite all that, she posed such a threat you had to arrest her over a broken tail light? Briggs opened his mouth, then closed it.
Sie längse was tick.
The prosecutor continued, flipping to another page. Additionally, an internal review of your arrest history shows a disproportionate number of traffic stops involving black drivers in this district.
The murmurs greluda. Briggs face darkened.
Judge Kirkland set his file down with a sigh. Sergeant, I don't like what I'm hearing. She resisted, Briggs muttered, crossing his arms. The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. The body cam footage says otherwise. Another ripple of sound moved through the room. Briggs straightened in his chair, defensive now. I was following standard procedure. Judge Kirkland wasn't convinced. He nodded toward the bailiff.
Let's play the footage.
A screen lowered at the front of the courtroom. The video began to play, Briggs's voice barking orders, Renee's calm replies, the unnecessary escalation, the smug way he tightened the cuffs.
No one spoke. The Silence was absolute.
When the footage ended, Judge Kirkland leaned forward, steepling his fingers. Sergeant Briggs, you violated protocol. You conducted an unlawful arrest and failed to disclose full details in your initial statement. Briggs started to protest, but the judge raised a hand. The charges against Lieutenant Commander Dawson are hereby dismissed, Kirkland said, his gavel striking hard and final. And I strongly recommend an internal investigation into Sergeant Briggs's conduct.
The tension in the room broke like a snapwire.
Briggs looked stunned, face flushed, jaw clenched, hands curling into fists.
Renee exhaled slowly, her expression calm.
She never doubted how this would end. As she gathered her things, she looked toward Briggs one last time. Their eyes met. No words were needed. Because this time, she wasn't the one fighting for her reputation.
He was.
Briggs turned abruptly, storming out of the courtroom. His heavy footsteps echoed down the polished hallway. He could feel the eyes on him, officers, court staff, even reporters who had arrived after word of the case spread.
The story wasn't over.
But for the first time, everyone could see who the real problem had been all along. He wasn't used to this. Briggs was used to control, to walking into a room and commanding respect or fear. But now, the power he'd always taken for granted felt like it was slipping through his fingers, grain by grain. And then came the voice that froze him where he stood.
Sergeant Briggs.
The words cut sharply through the hallway noise.
Briggs turned.
Chief Eldon Baker stood a few feet away, arms crossed, expression unreadable. The older man had over 30 years on the force, a name spoken with respect, a voice that carried weight.
Briggs straightened. Sir.
Baker studied him for a long moment, then gave a curt nod toward his office.
Inside.
The door shut behind them with a heavy click. What the hell were you thinking? Baker demanded, his tone low but edged with fury.
Briggs exhaled sharply.
I was doing my job.
Your job.
Baker scoffed, tossing a file onto the desk.
It landed with a dull toot, pages spilling open.
That's not what it looks like from here.
The body cam footage.
The arrest history. The fact that you didn't even know who you were arresting. Briggs's nostrils flared. What does that have to do with anything?
Baker leaned forward, eyes hard. Everything.
This wasn't some random woman, Briggs. This was a high-ranking Navy officer. You think this is just going to disappear?
Briggs looked away, jaw tight.
She was disrespectful.
She questioned. That's not a crime, Baker cut in.
Briggs scoffed, shaking his head.
You don't get it people like that. Baker's expression darkened.
People like what, Sergeant?
Silence.
Briggs swallowed but said nothing. The chief sighed, rubbing his forehead. The DA is reviewing every single one of your cases from the last 5 years. You've been flagged for racial profiling. And you'd better believe this department isn't going down with you. Briggs felt his stomach twist. What does that mean? It means, Baker said, straightening, you're being placed on immediate suspension.
Effective now.
Internal Affairs is investigating. And if they find what I think they'll find, he shook his head slowly. Your career is over.
The words hit Briggs like a punch.
His face flushed red, pulse pounding in his ears.
This is bull. Don't finish that sentence. Baker's voice was ice. Pack up your desk.
And if I were you, I'd get a lawyer. Briggs stood frozen, fists clenched at his sides. The walls of the office suddenly felt smaller. He had spent years building his reputation on fear and control, but in a single day, it had all come undone. For the first time in his career, Sergeant Daniel Briggs realized he wasn't untouchable. Across town, Renee Dawson sat in a quiet cafe, stirring a cup of coffee as she scrolled through her phone. The case had already made headlines. Lieutenant Commander wrongfully arrested. Officer under investigation.
She wasn't surprised.
From the moment she'd stepped out of her car that night, she'd known exactly how it would unfold. She'd seen men like Briggs before, entitled, arrogant, used to bending the law to fit their egos.
But this time he lost.
Her phone buzzed, a message from her attorney. Briggs has been suspended. Might face charges. Renee took a slow sip of her coffee.
Good.
She glanced out the window, watching the city move steadily on around her. The fight wasn't over, not for her, not for the people Briggs had likely hurt before. But today, at least, was a win. When she stepped outside, the air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain. The weight of the last 24 hours should have lingered on her shoulders, but it didn't. She walked with the same quiet confidence she always had, head high, step steady.
Her phone buzzed again. And she smiled.
This time, the number flashing on her screen was one she recognized. Renee sighed, then answered. Lieutenant Commander, the familiar voice greeted her.
I assume you've seen the news.
I have. A brief silence followed. And how are you feeling? The captain asked. Renee glanced at her reflection in a nearby storefront window. No cracks in her composure.
No trace of defeat.
I feel like I did exactly what I was supposed to do, she replied. The captain's voice softened.
Tats wat I tugt jud sei.
A pause, then. The Department of Defense has taken an interest in your case. Don't be surprised if they ask you to speak about it. Renee exhaled through her nose. Not sure I'm interested in being a headline. You already are, the captain countered gently. And whether you like it or not, what happened to you is part of something bigger.
She knew that.
She had always known that. Briggs wasn't an isolated case. He was a symptom of a system that had allowed men like him to operate unchecked for years. This wasn't just about her. It was about the dozens, maybe hundreds, of people who had been in her shoes but didn't have the rank, the resources, or the voice to fight back. Renee leaned against a streetlight, watching traffic slide by in the late afternoon haze. This isn't the first time something like this has happened, she said quietly. And it won't be the last.
No, the captain agreed.
But it's the first time Briggs is facing real consequences, and that's because you didn't back down. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the words sink in.
He was right.
She hadn't backed down, not when Briggs pulled her over, not when he tried to intimidate her, not when the cuffs cut into her wrists. Even behind bars, knowing the odds were stacked against her, she stayed calm, stayed grounded. And now, she had won. One last thing, the captain said after a beat. You might be getting a call from the mayor's office. Her eyebrows lifted.
Oh.
Seems they want to recognize you, for handling the situation with professionalism and grace.
Renee smirked.
Now that's ironic.
The captain chuckled.
You going to accept it?
She thought for a moment, then shrugged. I'll think about it. Fair enough, he said. Proud of you, Lieutenant Commander. The call ended.
Renee slipped her phone back into her pocket. Across the street, a mother walked hand in hand with her young son. He was laughing about something, carefree and bright. Renee watched them for a moment, the next generation. She had fought for herself, yes. But she had also fought for him. For every black boy and girl who deserved to grow up in a world where men like Briggs couldn't wield their badges like weapons. She took a deep breath and stepped off the curb, walking into the hum of the city. Her stride was steady, her purpose clear. The fight wasn't over, it never really was. Power unchecked is power abused. And the only way to change the system is to hold it accountable. What happened to Renee happens to people every day, people without rank, without protection, without evidence to defend themselves. That's why it's important to speak up.
To demand change. To refuse silence.
If this story made you think, share it. If it made you angry, talk about it. And if it made you realize how much work is left to do, stay engaged. Because real change doesn't start in courtrooms. It starts with conversations.